Hello, and welcome to Rejuvi 45. For those of you who are new to us, Rejuvi 45 is a modern leadership community. If you know us or been with us before, a fun fact for you is here last week, we just kicked off the fourth season or fourth volume, as we call it, of Rejuvi 45, which are discussions on modern leadership topics. In these sessions, we focus on the disruption necessary for leadership development in today's business world. Our belief is that modern leadership can and really must be both humanely compassionate and fiercely focused on business objectives and outcomes. Today's episode is the fourth installment of what we call Channeling Mr. Bannister. Thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Goddard, and I'm one of the principals here at Rejuvi, and I'm pleased to be joined by Andy Watt. Andy is a friend and colleague who, among other things, has had a very successful career in sales and sales leadership, much of it in the ever-changing, ever-challenging medical device world. Thanks as well to Andy for joining. And Andy, why don't you, tell us a little bit more about yourself, whatever you'd like to share with the group.
No, sure, Scott, and top of the afternoon to you as well as your listeners. I've been a student of leadership for my entire career. I'm very passionate on this topic. Um, I am fortunate to be married. I have a wonderful 27-year-old daughter. Life is good. I'm currently working in a board director role with Big Brothers Big Sisters. We're a nonprofit um, agency here in Chicago and have been involved with this organization for 17 years. You mentioned the med device that paid the bills. I was involved with that for 32 years, with a large majority of that being with two Fortune 500 companies, Boston Scientific for 22 years and Medtronic for 6 years. So a bulk of those 32 years were with those two companies. So again, thrilled to be with you, everyone, and thanks again for the invite.
Of course, happy to have you, and glad you were able to make this work. Yeah, as I think about our careers, both being in sales. If I recall, your first job was driving a Frito-Lay truck, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly right.
that's
In
right.
throughout Colorado and Wyoming. So yeah, good memory.
Well, fortunately, our careers have taken us on some fantastic journeys, and as I think about it in business life, and certainly very commonly in sales, sports analogies are often used to convey an idea, to set examples, or is kind of a compelling anecdote for that compete to win mentality that realistically all of us in the business world have to carry to a certain degree, in our daily routine. But certainly that's mandatory in the sales world, right?
Hmm. For
So when I
sure.
chose to host this topic as the Rejuvi host, channeling Mr. Bannister, um, almost immediately thought of asking you to join me, Andy, and it really might have been because we had just recently caught back up over coffee, and so you were kind of top of mind. But honestly, I feel like it was probably much more about the shared sales DNA that we've had because we've shared those experiences off and on across our career. And so, you just really jumped straight to mind. And I know when I reached out to you to first ask about joining me, I asked if you knew the name Roger Bannister. And you were, without hesitation, very quick to say, now, wasn't that the guy who broke the 4 minute mile? And not much of a surprise, kind of proving my point earlier that sports championing sports stories get used many times over in the in the sales and the business world. So for those of you who may not necessarily be familiar with Roger Bannister, though, I'll give a little bit of color and background. In the 1952 Summer Olympics in Helsinki, Finland, Roger Bannister was competing for Great Britain in the 1500-meter race. No, not the mile. Andy had already had said, he was the guy who broke the 4-minute mile. He wasn't competing in the mile. He was competing in the 1500, and he placed fourth in the Olympics. So we, excuse me, we're not talking about the Olympic champion from 1952 either. Now, a little bit of good news for Mr. Bannister. Or Sir Bannister, actually. He did set the British record that day in the 1500. But more notably, for context for today's discussion, and more notably from the history books as they were then soon to be written, he took particular interest in one of his split times in this race. And shortly after the Olympics ended, he and three of his training partners set their sights on breaking what was, to that day and for the decades leading up to it, thought to be an unattainable, unbreakable record, the sub 4-minute mile. Now, physicians, trainers, even runners had thought that this was potentially unattainable. So they knew their goal was obviously lofty. They knew their goal was going to be a physical one. It was going to take plenty of training to get to a performance level to execute that goal. And then they also knew that they would have to train differently than those that had gone before them. So they were going about changing their training methodologies. But what they came to realize was this was equally, if not more so, a mental goal and a mental challenge. There was a necessary mind shift required, and that's kind of the connective tissue in this story to our perspective on modern leadership. So if we fast forward from those days at the end of the 1952 Olympics in Finland to a cold, rainy May 6th date in 1954 on a track at Oxford University, they did it. 3 minutes, 59 and 4/10 seconds later, they had broken the record. Roger and his two pacing partners broke that barrier that had previously been thought unattainable. And this, just as a reminder, it took decades to get to this point. And you ready for the punchline, Andy?
Absolutely.
Within 2 months, his record was broken again. There was a faster miler. So clearly what they had done stuck, and others followed. So fast forwarding to today, there are over 1,800 runners who have officially completed sub 4-minute miles in competition. And I don't believe the statistics are even kept on unofficial records of how many people have run sub 4-minute miles. So why does this relate to modern leadership? Well, really, we could probably draw multiple anecdotes and define in many ways that how it relates to modern leadership. But key for us is this change in mindset, this change and shift in mindset that was necessary. Successful leadership, successful modern leadership requires a specific mindset, and more importantly, a willingness and a drive to shift as necessary and shift, at pace, at scale. So if we take a look as an example, what technology is doing, in the business world. I mean, obviously, everybody knows about, the AI discussions, the machine learning discussions, the chat GPT discussions. Technology is rapidly impacting how we do business. And leadership development needs to embrace and shift past these historic mindsets and methodologies that in some cases have been in place for decades. It's not uncommon that you look at leadership development practices that are truthfully years and years, sometimes decades old, in their baseline or their framework. So with that, let me throw a question your way, Andy, and let you talk a little bit. When you think about leadership today, sales or otherwise, does not need to be sales specific. What are some of the mindsets that exist that we might believe to be untouchable or unattainable? What comes to your mind?
Yeah, and first and foremost, Scott, great introduction with why we're here, and also the analogy of Mr. Bannister, because you're right. I remember reading some books on that, and I think the mindset is perfect. So your question on modern leadership is very applicable. And so for me, when it comes to leadership today, several mindsets seem particularly entrenched and challenging to shift right now. And there's several. I think the first one has to be hierarchy authority. Many leaders today operate under the belief that authority should be from a top down perspective. And this we know hinders collaboration, it hinders innovation. And so having that old school model, and more importantly, the mindset, is something that we need to get by and to shift. Um, Another one is being short focused or short term focused, excuse me. And some leaders prioritize immediate results over long term sustainability. And this can undermine the strategic planning and a vision that organizations have. And I get that there are certain roles that are more short term than long term, but as a whole, I think modern leadership has to bridge themselves on the long term sustainability. And I would say the last one that I've noticed is resilience to feedback. I had a mentor once. You were talking about the first job out of college with Frito Lay, and I remembered my mentor was someone that would provide feedback, and it was a gift, and I always associated that. But there is a mindset today that views feedback as criticism. So rather than being an opportunity for growth, this criticism or this type of mindset creates a toxic environment in today's world. So I think, I guess, to summarize your question or to summarize my feedback on it, is shifting these three different mindsets requires a concerted effort, open communication, and a willingness to embrace change. It often starts at the top, and the leaders that are modeling these behaviors need to do so if they wish others in the organization to do so.
Well, that was fantastic insight, Andy. I appreciate it, and completely agree with you on all 3 points. And I think we could spend certainly several minutes talking about each of them. I'd love to maybe unpack the second point you made, kind of that short term focus a little bit. And basically, my thought is some of the, you're definitely right that that is a very common practice now, and unfortunately, to a certain degree, it's driven by by design and by by our environment, by the business environment, the pace at which business is done and executed. Nowadays is so much faster, kind of like the technology impacts that we were talking about, and if you look at, we can even parallel it to the records being set in the for the mile. It took decades, and then it took months, and then it took days, right, to for the next record to
Mhm.
be set. It's very similar to the drive in business. Is the competition is always going to be pushing. It's always going to be pushing, faster and harder. Fantastic points there on that first question. So, you know, love to hear you maybe share a story, about when your mindset was what helped you succeed in the face of doubt, adversity, or challenge, right? How did it differ? And maybe think about it from the perspective of how it differed from what your peers or what others or what your competition was doing, and how um, that mindset change for you made the difference.
Great. Well, first of all, Scott, great question. I can think of a unique experience that happened to me last December that helped me succeed through the face of doubt as well as non-favorable conditions. So 10 months ago, I received a LinkedIn message from someone that I interviewed 7 years ago. So, and to give you some context, I thought very high of this person, so much that from interviewing her in the past 7 years ago, she went through a very thorough and rugged interview process of 5 different interviews. So these were in-person interviews that she went through, part with me and others from my team. And well, she finished second or runner up, and we had 2 blockbuster candidates, but unfortunately only one position. And you could argue that she could be discouraged. She could be disappointed for not getting the job. And she invested a lot of time and energy for this career opportunity. However, she enjoyed the interview process so well, from learning the company, learning the products, me as her potential manager, meeting with other members on the team, getting to know them. She also was very appreciative that she was able to ask a wide range of questions to get to know her from the questions that we asked her. So she reached out to me again 10 months ago to say, hey, I would really like you to mentor me on how to recruit, and also how do you create your own interview process based on her own positive experiences that she had 7 years ago. And Scott, I got to be honest with you, this was the first time that something like this has happened to me before, from that long ago, and much less from someone that I did respect, I did enjoy, but again, unfortunately, she was not viewed as the top choice at the time. So back to your question on, here is my mindset that helped me succeed in the face of doubt and in the non-favorable conditions. It would have been very easy, and some would argue justifiable, to tell this former candidate, thank you, but no thanks, right? In other
Right.
words, we're not going to go forward with this. I think when you think about our organizations now and how much time and energy we're currently putting in with our people on the team, it's easy to understand that a candidate that's not part of the team, you don't want to train. You might not have the energy or the time to go through the mentoring, especially when it's not your own team, right? I mean, you got to be kidding me. It's kind of a funny ask that she did, but this was definitely a non-favorable condition, is what I'm trying to get at.
Mhm.
So at the time of the ask, I thought about it over the weekend, and I decided, you know what? This is unusual, but I'm going to accept her request to help her out. Now, my peers would not have done this from working with them in the past. Anything that they would want to do would have to be only with people on their team, not working with someone outside of their team. And so I believed that in the long-term opportunities, again, getting back to your first question, having the long-term approach, while it might not be easy at times, is definitely the right thing to do. So I spent 8 months coaching her, and not only was the outcome wildly successful, she really appreciated it. And that mentoring went on from not just the recruitment and the interview process, but also looking at leadership development, which again is the topic we're talking about
Right.
today. And so that was a very natural ebbs and flow that what we developed. But I personally can think of 1,000 reasons why someone would not want to do this,
Right.
given the amount of, you know, uh, degrees of work that we have on our desk. But at the end of the day, looking back, I knew she was a high potential candidate 7 years ago. And Scott, I can tell you today, she's still a high potential candidate.
Right.
And so she'll be wildly successful no matter where she goes. But to summarize your question, I would say this story shows me how a long term focus on people, which that's what leadership is, right?
Yep.
You manage your resources, but when it comes to your people, you lead them, not manage, but lead. And this is a terrific return on investment, rather just looking at a short term focus.
Yeah. Fantastic, fantastic story, and just a great experience, a great endeavor, and clearly in this situation, Andy, both you and she left a lasting impression and a lasting mark on one another, right? She would not have reached out to you with that request had it not been positive, even though it didn't end up in the net experience or the net outcome that she wanted on, in that time, right? In during the interview cycle, and vice versa, right? She made enough of an impression upon you that it maybe wasn't it would have been easier to say no, but you felt like clearly the right thing to do was to say yes, and that it really highlights a point again that we know is critical, and it his is an aspect of leadership development historically as well, that compassionate side, right? That compassionate component. You, as you said, we lead, right? We don't order, we don't instruct, we lead. You lead by example. And I think that that's a perfect a perfect story fitting that aspect of it. Does not remove from the fact that she had to continue on being successful in her career to get to the position that she's in now, where she felt like reaching out to you was going to be of value to what she was responsible for to her organization. And that kind of comes back to that other side. We've all got these measurable aspects of our business. We take experience, or we make note of our experiences across our career. And I think that is, again, the other side of this equation. It's a good highlight on the other side of this equation. So thank you for sharing that story. That was not what I expected necessarily, but fantastic. Um, Last question for you. So, um, what do you think is the most critical mindset to being a successful leader today in this business world, and how is it measured? Right? So you've already talked about some, so I realize there may be a little bit of, maybe a little bit of overlap here, but I'm also really curious about that the measurement side because measurement's not always easy.
Yeah, no, another great question. And but I think the front end of your question is an easy one. I've had the pleasure and the honor to work with some great leaders from Fortune 500 companies, all the way down to some small startup companies. And the one thing that I have appreciated about them is the critical qualities to be a successful leader is to have emotional intelligence, and other people call it EQ, but this encompasses the ability to understand and manage one's own emotion, but it also means to understand the emotion of others. And there's several reasons why emotional intelligence is important. Number one is empathy, right? If leaders with high EQ can connect with their teams, that understand the motivations, the concerns, and their feelings. This has to foster trust as well as strengthen the relationships. So empathy is key. Another one is conflict resolution. Leaders with high emotional intelligence can navigate these conflicts more adeptly and recognize the emotional undercurrents that may be going on within the organization and addressing them constructively. And this is definitely not a science, it's more of an art on that conflict resolution. And the third one, and probably one of my most favorite, is great leaders inspire and motivate their teams. They foster a positive culture and they enhance engagement and productivity. So, those to me are the three elements of what a successful leader, should have. And your second question on measurement is an interesting one because in leadership, we have a lot of initiatives that we think is going to be good. We are not 100% sure we execute on it, but we do our best. So bringing it back to measurement is key. So I really respect you for asking that part of the equation. And in my mind, there's another three elements that we can measure when it comes to intelligent um, intelligence, excuse me, emotional intelligence. Got tongue-tied there. First is the 360-degree feedback. If you can gather feedback from your peers, from the subordinates, from the managers, they can provide insight to the leader's emotional intelligence. So you're highlighting the strengths, but you're also uncovering the areas of improvement. And Scott, notice that I didn't say weakness because I don't believe in that people have weaknesses. I believe we all have areas of development. Yes, we have areas of improvement that we can do better. And yes, we have strengths, but doing these 360-degree feedback is a wonderful tool to measure one aspect of it. Another one is employee engagement surveys. Measuring the team's engagement and satisfaction can reflect the effectiveness of a leader's emotional intelligence. And this emotional awareness for leaders can create a very positive work environment. Um, this is my own opinion, but short of short of your spouse, I think the most important person in your life should be your manager. You think about how much time and energy we are working. If you are not feeling productive, a sense of attainment, buying into the vision, believing in the mission statement, then I think it's a sad story. So that goes right back to the emotional intelligence and how you can measure it. The
Mhm.
final way to measure emotional intelligence is retention, right?
Yep.
Retention is very important in organizations. In my last organization, we had a goal of 14% was the retention that we wanted to, or excuse me, 14% of turnover.
Right.
Um, we wanted to attain that. And so one way we did that was every year when you'd sit down with your people to do your annual performance evaluation, we would ask questions. And some of my best questions were, hey, Scott, how are you and I doing right now? I mean, before we get into your annual performance, just shoot it to me straight. And it really unfolded a lot of wonderful questions. Another one could be, hey, what can I do differently to help you? Right? I'm here as as a servant leader, what can I do to help you be more productive, successful, like your job, etc. And then I think if you're being true to yourself, you have to ask yourself, okay, what am I doing that's driving you crazy, right? And if you can identify those, then I think that will help the retainment and lower your turnover rate. But getting to know your people and matching up the EQ will help them, your people, understand you care and you possibly can increase your employee retention.
Right.
Last but not least is when people do leave the company, I think it's critically important to find out why
Yep.
and asking some very tough questions about, hey, what did your manager do or not do that we can do differently in the future to keep other teammates? But, I think to wrap up the emotional intelligence, Scott, great question as to what the keys are, great questions on how to measure it. But at the end of the day, these are some of the critical skill sets that successful leaders have.
Again, appreciate the thoroughness, thoughtfulness of of your answer, Andy. One thing, especially kind of on the measurement side, one of the things that I heard and really made note of in your points was you didn't use this terminology, but it's multidimensional. Right? There are individual interactive aspects to the measurement. There are organizational drivers or components to the measurement, KPIs, etc., that are very critical. On the measurement side of the equation, and I think that's a great point to kind of springboard from is that this modern leadership really requires that we come at it from multiple dimensions, top down and bottom up, as you portrayed in some of your answers. So again, truly appreciate it. I believe that this discussion is certainly indicative of the fact that modern leadership is the mindset in our from Rejuvi's perspective, leveraging data, leveraging technology, leveraging that information that you have access to, making certain that you collect it, is the measurement component, and that's what's going to drive significant improvement in outcomes in a measured period of time. So, as an example, today, when we look at the business world today, more people than ever before are asked to lead a team or a project or a program or something. They're asked to lead something than ever before in history. Why is this the case? Quite honestly, that's a topic for discussion for another day because there's a lot about the business world to unpack there. Um, but the point about the leadership reality is true, right? The Over 90% of new leaders feel individually underskilled, and over 93% of new leaders feel underprepared by their organization. There's a small nuance there, right? Both in the percentages and the numbers and the two perspectives, but they feel underprepared by their organization to execute their primary objectives. And these conditions and headwinds, much like what we talked about with Roger Bannister at Oxford University in 1954, are not going to subside. They're not going to go away. There are always going to be headwinds and challenging conditions. So we've got to continue to shift our mindset to work with them. We need to think differently. Let's channel Roger Bannister to excel today. And I'll say that, with that, I think we're at a point where probably a good stopping point for the discussion today. I want to thank the folks who joined us today or are watching the recording this episode at a future date. Special thanks to you, Andy, for joining and sharing your perspectives with us. In parting, I'll leave you, Andy, as well as again the folks that have joined us with a question to ponder. What's your 4-minute mile? And what mindset do you need to shift to achieve it? We'd love to hear from any of you listening to explore this concept more with you, and see if Rejuvi can help your organization facilitate the shift. If it resonated with you, if this topic hit home, please like or subscribe to our channels. We'd love to see you at the next Rejuvi 45 episode on October 17th at 1 o'clock. Thursdays, 1 p.m. Central, and we'll be digging in on what we call the connection. Until then, be well, and thanks again.